An engaged couple disappeared just days before their wedding in 1975, leaving behind a mystery that haunted their families. But 28 years later, the bride's wedding dress is discovered, and what it reveals makes everyone's blood run cold. The crisp October air of Spring Creek carried the sweet scent of fallen leaves as Jessica Murphy opened her eyes to the gentle morning light filtering through the lace curtains of her childhood bedroom. She stretched languidly, her gaze drifting to the wedding dress hanging on her closet door, a vision in white satin and delicate lace that seemed to glow in the autumn sunlight. In just 3 days, it would transform her from Miss Jessica Murphy, beloved fourth-grade teacher, to Mrs. Matthew Collins, wife of the promising forest engineer. Jessica ran her fingers through her chestnut hair, savoring these final moments in her childhood room. Following tradition, she had moved back to her parents' Victorian home a week ago, not to see Matthew until they stood together at the altar beside Lake Hanging. The thought made her stomach flutter with anticipation. Downstairs, the familiar creaking of floorboards told her that her mother, Eleanor, was already preparing breakfast. The aroma of cinnamon and coffee wafted up the stairs, a comforting constant in a week of excited chaos. Later that morning, Jessica stood before her fourth-grade class, pointing to a map of Colorado, while 20 pairs of eyes followed her every move. "Now, who can tell me which Native American tribes first lived in our mountains?" she asked, smiling as several eager hands shot up. "Miss Murphy," piped up Timmy Wilson from the back row, completely ignoring the question. "Are you excited about your wedding? My mom says it's going to be the prettiest wedding Spring Creek has ever seen." Jessica felt her cheeks flush as the class erupted in giggles. "Yes, Timmy, I'm very excited. But right now, I'm even more excited to hear about the Ute tribe. Sarah, would you like to share what you learned?" Miles away, deep in the White River National Forest, Matthew Collins squinted at his notebook, carefully recording measurements for the reforestation project that had brought him to Spring Creek 5 years ago. The October sun dappled through the pine branches above, casting shifting patterns on his work. "So, Collins," called Frank Denvers, adjusting his Forest Service cap, "enjoying your last days of freedom?" The other men chuckled, elbowing each other good-naturedly. Matthew grinned, tucking his pencil behind his ear. "You know, I've been waiting for this day since I spilled cider all over Jessica at the fall festival. If that's losing freedom, sign me up." His mind drifted to that perfect moment 5 years ago. How mortified he'd been when he bumped into the pretty brunette manning the Murphy family apple pie booth, and how her laugh had immediately put him at ease. At precisely 12:30, Matthew's green Forest Service truck pulled up outside Rosie's Diner, the heart of Spring Creek social life for over 3 decades. Through the window, he could already see Jessica waiting at their usual booth, and his heart skipped just as it had the first time he saw her. Inside, Marjorie Rose, her silver hair pinned in the same bun she'd worn since 1943, approached their table with an extra slice of cherry pie. "Special delivery for the bride-to-be," she announced, placing it before Jessica with a flourish. "Been saving the best cherries just for you, honey." "Marjorie, you're too good to me," Jessica beamed, cutting into the flaky crust. "So," Matthew leaned forward, his voice dropping conspiratorially, "I've finalized the surprise honeymoon plans. You'll need to pack for warm weather, that's all I'm saying." Jessica's eyes lit up. "Give me a hint. Is it west? East? Please?" Their laughter mingled with the familiar sounds of clinking silverware and small-town chatter. At 1:30, Matthew paid the bill, and they walked hand in hand into the crisp afternoon, promising Marjorie they'd return next week to show her the wedding photos. As evening fell over Spring Creek, Eleanor Murphy glanced at the kitchen clock for the 3rd time in 10 minutes. Jessica had mentioned possibly visiting the seamstress for final adjustments to her dress, but dinner was getting cold, and the early darkness of autumn had fully settled over the mountains. By 9 o'clock, with a fine drizzle tapping against the windows, Eleanor's concern had grown into worry. She dialed the Collins residence, her fingers tense on the rotary phone. "George, it's Eleanor. Is Matthew with you? Jessica hasn't come home yet." The silence on the other end answered before George Collins could. "Matthew's not home either," he finally said, his voice tight. "We assumed he was with Jessica." At 10:15, Sheriff Derek Thompson's phone rang, pulling him away from the western he'd been half watching. Eleanor's voice trembled slightly as she explained the situation. "Now, Eleanor, I'm sure there's a simple explanation," Thompson said, reaching for his hat even as he spoke. "Maybe the car broke down somewhere without a phone. I'll gather some men and check the main roads." Within the hour, 15 men from town were driving the dark, rain-slicked roads around Spring Creek, headlights cutting through the mist as they searched for any sign of the missing couple. By midnight, with no trace found, the searchers returned to town, exhaustion and concern etched on their faces. Thompson promised a more organized search at first light, trying to project a confidence he was beginning to lose. Something about this didn't feel like a simple delay or breakdown. At 11:37 the following Wednesday morning, the tense silence in the sheriff's office was broken by the crackle of the radio. Deputy Roy Jenkins's breathless voice came through. "Found their car, Sheriff. Matthew's blue Chevy Nova, parked on the shoulder of State Highway 134, and you need to see what's on the driver's seat." Sheriff Thompson's knuckles turned white around the steering wheel as he accelerated toward State Highway 134. The rain had intensified overnight, transforming the mountain roads into slick ribbons of asphalt. His mind raced faster than his vehicle, cycling through possibilities, none of them good. When he arrived at the scene, Deputy Jenkins stood motionless beside the abandoned Chevy Nova, rain soaking through his uniform. The blue car sat perfectly aligned with the shoulder, as if carefully parked rather than abandoned in haste. No skid marks, no signs of distress. "Show me," Thompson said simply. Jenkins wordlessly opened the driver's side door. There, arranged neatly on the seat, lay 2 small velvet boxes. Thompson felt his stomach drop as he carefully opened them with gloved hands, revealing the wedding bands Jessica and Matthew had chosen together, bands that should have been exchanged in just 2 days. "Whoever left this car here wanted us to find these," Thompson muttered, photographing the scene methodically while Jenkins stretched yellow police tape around the perimeter. No signs of struggle, keys still in the ignition, doors unlocked. Within 30 minutes, Eleanor Murphy's station wagon screeched to a halt at the edge of the police tape, followed closely by George Collins's pickup truck. Thompson intercepted them before they could contaminate the scene. "Eleanor, George, please stay back while we process." His words died as Eleanor spotted the evidence bag containing the wedding rings. The sound that escaped her lips chilled every officer present, a primal wail that seemed to rise from the deepest well of maternal terror. "Those are their rings," she choked out, her legs buckling. "Why would they leave their rings?" George Collins stood rigid, his weathered face ashen. Matthew would never leave that car unlocked, never. And he certainly wouldn't abandon those rings. Something's happened to them, Sheriff. By afternoon, the shoulder of Highway 134 had transformed into a hive of activity. Officers meticulously combed the surrounding area, marking even the smallest potential evidence with numbered flags. Volunteers arrived in droves, organizing into search parties that spread outward from the abandoned vehicle. Back at the sheriff's office, Thompson created a timeline board, pinning photos of Jessica and Matthew alongside a map marked with their last known locations. Marjorie Rose sat nervously in a chair opposite his desk, twisting her apron between gnarled fingers. "They were happy as can be, Sheriff. Jessica had my special cherry pie, and Matthew couldn't stop talking about their honeymoon surprise." Marjorie's eyes welled up. "They left around 1:30, holding hands like teenagers, said they'd bring me wedding photos next week." By nightfall, search dogs had arrived from the neighboring county, sniffing clothing items belonging to the missing couple before being led to the search area. Their handlers guided them through the increasingly difficult terrain as darkness fell, powerful flashlights cutting through the thick forest. In the town church, Reverend Adams led an improvisational prayer vigil, the pews filling quickly with concerned residents. Candles flickered as townsfolk whispered theories, each more troubling than the last. "I heard Lloyd Peterson saw a dark blue van parked near there yesterday," murmured Mrs. Winters to her neighbor. Said it looked out of place. Thompson interviewed the owner of the nearest convenience store, disappointment washing over him when he learned the establishment's rudimentary security camera had been broken for months. As teams of exhausted searchers returned to town, Thompson studied the wedding bands under his desk lamp. Something about their careful placement nagged at him. This wasn't a case of car trouble or runaways. People fleeing don't leave behind symbols of their commitment, perfectly arranged as if in display. Rubbing his burning eyes, Thompson made the decision to call the FBI. This case was beyond the resources of their small department, and every passing hour diminished their chances of finding Jessica and Matthew alive. The phone on Thompson's desk rang at 3:17 in the morning, jarring him from a half-sleep at his desk. He snatched it up instantly, hoping for news from one of his deputies. "Sheriff Thompson," he answered, voice alert despite his exhaustion. The line crackled with silence, then came heavy breathing followed by words whispered so softly he had to press the receiver painfully against his ear. "Stop looking where you shouldn't, Sheriff, or the teacher and her fiancé won't be the only ones to disappear in Spring Creek." Thompson's hand froze on the receiver, the whispered threat hanging in the air like poison. He immediately activated the department's rudimentary call tracing system, but the line went dead before anything could be captured. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the office's chill. By dawn, Thompson had implemented enhanced security protocols for all officers involved in the search. The threatening call only confirmed his suspicions. This was no ordinary disappearance. Special Agent Robert Sanderson arrived that afternoon, stepping from the FBI helicopter onto the baseball field with military precision. His sharp eyes scanned the town as he walked briskly toward Thompson, briefcase clutched in his hand like a weapon. "Quite the welcome committee," Sanderson remarked, nodding toward the crowd of onlookers gathering at the field's edge. Within hours, the school gymnasium had transformed into an operations center. Large topographical maps covered the walls. Telephones were installed at temporary desks, and FBI technicians configured equipment that seemed futuristic to the local deputies. "Tell me about Harold Baker," Sanderson said, reviewing preliminary interviews while Thompson poured coffee into paper cups. The interview with Baker took place in his expansive home overlooking the valley. The retired teacher sat comfortably in his leather chair, offering tea with practiced hospitality. "Jessica always had a flair for drama," Baker said, waving his hand dismissively. "Smart girl, but restless. Wouldn't surprise me if she simply got cold feet about settling in this little town forever." Thompson watched Baker's eyes carefully, noting how they never quite met his when discussing Jessica directly. Across town, the florist delivered arrangements to the wedding venue as scheduled. No one had the heart to cancel the order. White roses and autumn dahlias sat in crystal vases, their beauty slowly fading as the hours passed. A silent testament to celebration turned to mourning. On what should have been their wedding day, Eleanor Murphy sat alone in the front pew of the church, Jessica's delicate veil draped across her lap. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, casting rainbow patterns that once would have danced across her daughter's gown. The church remained silent, except for Eleanor's soft weeping. That evening, George Collins stood stoically in the town square gazebo, lighting the first candle of the vigil. "We will keep these flames burning until Jessica and Matthew come home," he announced, his voice cracking slightly. Hundreds of townspeople stepped forward one by one, adding their candles until the square glowed with hopeful light. Donna Peterson sat nervously in the interview room, twisting her wedding ring as she spoke to Agent Sanderson. Jessica mentioned feeling watched sometimes. "I thought she was just having pre-wedding jitters, but now," she trailed off, guilt etched across her features. FBI agents poured through Jessica's bank statements, phone records, and personal diaries, searching for patterns or irregularities. Thompson watched the methodical federal process with mixed emotions, grateful for their resources, but pained by what their presence represented. Tensions erupted at Rosie's Diner the following day when Bill Harmon loudly suggested the couple had planned their disappearance. Maybe they didn't want the life everyone mapped out for them, he argued. Martha Jenkins slammed her coffee cup down in response. "You know nothing about those kids. They were in love, planning a future." The argument reflected a town increasingly divided by fear and suspicion. During an afternoon briefing, Thompson revealed a potentially significant connection. Jessica dated David Wilson briefly in high school. The relationship ended badly after her senior year. His father owns half the undeveloped land around Spring Creek. Sanderson interviewed Thomas Wilson that evening in his hilltop mansion. The wealthy landowner shifted uncomfortably when asked about his son's relationship with Jessica. "Ancient history," Wilson muttered, avoiding eye contact. "David's been in Europe for years. Are you suggesting my family had something to do with this?" Meanwhile, search teams equipped with FBI-provided infrared technology explored remote areas previously too difficult to access. Their faces showed increasing strain as each day passed without discoveries. At night, behind closed doors, Thompson and Sanderson updated their investigation board, adding new connections and theories while removing those disproven. The timeline now stretched across an entire wall, the web of possibilities growing more complex rather than narrowing. "We're missing something," Thompson said, staring at Jessica's smiling face in her teacher ID photo. When Thompson finally left the office well past midnight, the weight of 7 sleepless days pressed down on his shoulders. Walking to his car in the empty parking lot, he noticed something on the passenger seat that made his blood freeze. A brown, unmarked envelope that hadn't been there before. With trembling fingers, he opened it, his face draining of color as he stared at its contents. A Polaroid photograph showing Jessica and Matthew, apparently unconscious, in an unknown room, with that day's newspaper clearly visible in the corner. Thompson's hands shook as he stared at the Polaroid, the image burning itself into his mind. Jessica and Matthew lay unconscious on what appeared to be a motel bed, their faces pale but showing no visible injuries. The newspaper date in the corner confirmed the horrifying truth. They had been alive after their disappearance, and someone was taunting the investigation. He rushed back to the station, calling Sanderson on the way. "We've got proof of life, or at least proof they were alive after they vanished," he said, his voice tight with urgency. Within the hour, FBI technicians were examining the photograph under specialized equipment, searching for any detail that might identify the location. Sanderson directed the team to look for reflections, shadows, distinctive furnishings, anything that could narrow their search. "The lighting suggests an interior room, possibly with limited natural light," observed the lead technician, adjusting the magnification. "Notice how the shadows fall. I'd say this is a room with one small window, likely a motel or similar accommodation." The next morning, the tension between the families erupted in the school hallway outside the command center. George Collins cornered Eleanor Murphy, his voice low but intense. "What aren't you telling us about Jessica's past? First David Wilson, now this photograph. Someone had a reason to target them. Target her." Thompson stepped between them, placing a calming hand on George's shoulder. "This isn't helping anyone, least of all Jessica and Matthew." Later that day, Thompson and Sanderson drove up the winding mountain road to the Wilson estate, where David now resided following his return from Europe. The 30-year-old man who greeted them bore little resemblance to the confident teenager in Jessica's yearbook photos. His face held a permanent scowl, eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I haven't seen Jessica in years," David said, lighting a cigarette as they sat on his expansive deck overlooking the valley. "We dated in high school. It ended. That's ancient history." Sanderson leaned forward slightly. "And why did it end exactly?" David exhaled a plume of smoke, his expression darkening. "Jessica dumped me after Baker started filling her head with ideas about prestigious colleges and her special potential. Said I was holding her back." He tapped ash onto the expensive deck. "Then a few months later, I caught the old man photographing her at graduation. Not the ceremony, just her. Standing behind a tree with a telephoto lens like some creep. I confronted him, and he claimed he was documenting exceptional students for the school newsletter." Thompson and Sanderson exchanged glances. the same thought crossing their minds. Back in town, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Main Street hardware store reported selling out of deadbolts, and mothers were calling children home before sunset. Behaviors unheard of in Spring Creek just a week earlier. Thompson noticed residents eyeing the Denver Post reporter with undisguised suspicion as he interviewed locals at Rosie's Diner. In the command center, excitement erupted when a technician called Sanderson and Thompson to his station. "I found something in the mirror reflection. See this object on the shelf?" On the enhanced image, barely visible in a mirror on the wall behind the bed, stood what appeared to be a distinctive trophy. Thompson leaned closer, recognition dawning on his face. "That's the 1968 State Debate Trophy. Spring Creek High won it that year. I remember because it was such a big deal for a small school to beat the Denver teams." "How many of these trophies would exist in town?" Sanderson asked. "3 at most," Thompson replied, already flipping through school records. "One in the school display case, one given to the team coach, and possibly a replica for the team captain." The yearbook confirmed their suspicion. Harold Baker had been the debate team coach that year. The secretary's notes indicated that when the school received an updated trophy in the 80s, Baker had kept the original as a memento of his teaching achievement. While Thompson arranged for discreet surveillance on Baker's hillside home, Sanderson questioned why the former teacher had so quickly suggested Jessica and Matthew had run away voluntarily. That night, FBI agents in an unmarked car observed Baker's isolated home, noting lights burning well past midnight. Through powerful binoculars, they could see the silhouette of Baker moving between rooms, occasionally pausing to look out toward town. Thompson was driving home, exhaustion finally forcing him to rest, when his phone rang. Donna Peterson's panicked voice came through the speaker. "Sheriff, I was organizing some of Jessica's old boxes I kept after she moved, and I found something terrible. Unsigned love letters, dozens of them, with photographs of her taken without her knowledge, and the most recent one is dated just a month ago." Thompson and Sanderson leaned over Donna Peterson's kitchen table, carefully spreading out the disturbing collection of letters and photographs with gloved hands. The morning light illuminated dozens of candid shots of Jessica, walking to her car after school, shopping at the grocery store, even reading on her porch, all taken without her knowledge, from a distance. "This one's particularly concerning," Thompson said, pointing to a letter with trembling fingers. "You belong to someone who really values you, not a forest man who will never understand your brilliant mind." The handwriting was neat, almost scholarly, with distinctive loops on the capital letters. Sanderson placed several letters side by side, comparing them with known samples of Harold Baker's handwriting they'd obtained from school records. The FBI graphologist they'd brought in from Denver studied the samples under a portable magnifier. "There are significant similarities in the formation of certain letters, particularly the R and G," she explained. "But I can't testify this is definitely the same person. The writer was clearly disguising their natural hand." Frustration etched lines in Sanderson's face as he spoke with his Denver office. "I understand the legal threshold, but we need that warrant. This pattern of obsession fits perfectly with..." He paused, listening. "Fine. Keep digging into the vehicle records. We need that van." From a nearby hillside, agents photographed Baker's property using telephoto lenses, documenting his movements as he tended his garden and retrieved his mail, seemingly unaware of the surveillance. His mundane activities contrasted sharply with the disturbing evidence mounting against him. In town, Thompson interviewed Dr. Willis, the retired physician who had signed the death certificate for Baker's wife in 1971. The old doctor shifted uncomfortably in his armchair. "Elizabeth had chronic stomach problems that worsened over her final year," he explained, adjusting his glasses. "Nothing unusual for a woman her age. Why are you asking about this now?" Thompson kept his expression neutral. "Just following up on some old cases, doctor. Did you ever conduct any toxicology tests?" The doctor's hesitation spoke volumes. Later that afternoon, Mary Simmons, A former English teacher who had worked alongside Baker for 15 years sat nervously in Thompson's office, her fingers constantly adjusting her pearl necklace. Harold always had his favorites, she finally admitted after Thompson's gentle but persistent questioning. Always quiet, intelligent girls, the ones who appreciated literature and poetry. Girls like Jessica. She lowered her voice. I once found him alone with a student in his classroom after hours. He said they were discussing college applications, but the girl looked uncomfortable. At the command center, Sanderson pored over weather reports from October 1975, spreading the yellowed papers across the table. Look at this, he said, pointing to a meteorological chart. A severe storm hit the area the night they disappeared. Rainfall was 3 times the monthly average. Any tracks, tire marks, footprints, all washed away. Outside, search teams with more sophisticated equipment explored remote caves and ravines, areas that had been too difficult to access during the initial search nearly 3 decades ago. The hope of finding survivors had long faded, but the determination to discover the truth remained unwavering. In the town square, national news crews set up equipment, their satellite vans parked prominently. A reporter from NBC cornered a longtime resident, microphone thrust forward aggressively. Is it true Spring Creek has a history of disappearances? Sources suggest this isn't the first time people have vanished in these mountains. Eleanor Murphy stayed secluded in her home, blinds drawn against the media's intrusive lenses. Across town, George Collins physically confronted a reporter who had trespassed onto his property, the confrontation captured by cameras and broadcast nationally that evening. Thompson discovered vehicle registration records showing Baker had purchased a dark blue Dodge van at a county auction 3 months before the disappearance. The vehicle was conspicuously absent from Baker's property, despite him still owning it, according to DMV records. FBI agents checked motel registries within a 100-kilometer radius, looking for Baker's name or sightings of a blue van. At the Pinecrest Motel, the owner mentioned casually, Mr. Baker occasionally rented rooms for professional meetings, always paid cash, always requested room 8. That night, in the empty sheriff's office, Thompson and Sanderson stood before the investigation board, now dominated by information about Harold Baker. The pattern was clear, but legally insufficient for an arrest. We're close, Thompson said, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. But we need something concrete that places him with Jessica and Matthew that day. When Thompson finally returned home after another exhausting day, he found his front door slightly ajar. Drawing his gun, he entered cautiously, heart pounding as he discovered his home office completely ransacked. On his desk sat a single new item, a shoebox containing his father's police badge, stolen from the sheriff's department years before, accompanied by a handwritten note. Some things should remain buried, Derek, as your father learned. Thompson stared at the badge in shock, recognizing it instantly, despite the years it had spent missing. His father's badge, stolen during the Catherine Miller investigation in 1958. His hands trembled as he lifted the note, the connection unmistakable. This wasn't just about Jessica and Matthew, this was about buried history. When Sanderson arrived minutes later, Thompson was already pulling up floorboards in his study, revealing a hidden compartment containing a dust-covered manila folder. My father kept this separate from official records, Thompson explained, his voice unsteady. In 1958, 17-year-old Catherine Miller disappeared after the spring formal. The last person to see her alive was Howard Baker, Harold Baker's younger brother. Sanderson's expression hardened as Thompson spread the yellowed documents across the kitchen table. Catherine's case was never solved, but my father suspected the Baker family. Howard had an ironclad alibi provided by Harold, who was already teaching at the high school then. The parallels were undeniable. Another young woman vanishing without a trace, another Baker family connection, another decades-long mystery. Dawn brought renewed purpose to the investigation. FBI agents verified Baker's alibi for the day of Jessica and Matthew's disappearance, discovering that the educational conference in Denver he claimed to attend had never existed. He lied about his whereabouts, Sanderson confirmed, hanging up the phone. The conference on modern educational psychology was canceled 2 weeks before the scheduled date. Baker knew this. He was on the mailing list that received the notification. Meanwhile, in a steep ravine 10 miles from where Matthew's car had been found, a volunteer search team member called excitedly over the radio. "Sheriff, we found something, a piece of blue fabric caught on some brambles." Forensic technicians carefully collected the fabric, placing it in an evidence bag while photographing its exact location. Thompson watched as they compared it to swatches from Jessica's and Matthew's clothing descriptions, noting the different texture and weave. Back in town, Sanderson's persistence finally yielded results: a limited search warrant for Baker's property, specifically to look for the blue van registered in his name but conspicuously absent from sight. When the FBI team arrived at Baker's hillside home, the elderly teacher greeted them with practiced cordiality, tinged with visible nervousness. Of course, search whatever you need," he said, gesturing broadly. "Though I must say, this continued harassment is becoming quite tiresome." The agents asked about the van, and Baker's composure faltered momentarily. "The garage is around back," he said. "I rarely use it these days. My arthritis, you understand. Now, where did I put that key?" After several minutes of Baker searching for the key, agents grew suspicious of the delay. The garage, when finally opened, was conspicuously empty, though fresh oil stains marked the concrete floor and the overwhelming smell of cleaning products hung in the air. "When did you last clean in here, Mr. Baker?" Sanderson asked casually, kneeling to examine the stains. "Spring cleaning," Baker replied too quickly. "I'm very particular about maintenance." "In October?" Thompson questioned, noting how Baker's right eye twitched slightly. Across town, Eleanor Murphy sat at her dining room table sorting through condolence cards that had begun arriving from across the country. She paused, hand trembling, when she opened an unmarked envelope containing only a faded photograph of Jessica as a child. A school photo she didn't recognize, taken from an angle suggesting the photographer wasn't the official school photographer. That afternoon, Thompson interviewed Howard Baker by telephone, the younger Baker brother now living in Arizona. "Harold always had unusual interests," Howard said hesitantly. "After Catherine disappeared, he became obsessed with the case, keeping newspaper clippings, attending the searches. Our parents thought it was civic concern." Later, at the Presbyterian Church, the Murphy and Collins families attempted a united front during a prayer service. The strain showed in their rigid postures and minimal interaction, George Collins still harboring suspicions about Jessica's past, Eleanor resenting his implied accusations. As night fell, Baker stood at his kitchen window, watching the FBI vehicles finally depart his property. When he believed himself unobserved, a disconcerting smile briefly crossed his face, an expression of satisfaction that chilled the agent still photographing him from a concealed position in the woods. When the forensic team analyzed the blue fabric found in the ravine, technician Nancy Wheeler urgently summoned Thompson and Sanderson to the lab. "This fabric isn't from ordinary clothing. It's a specific type of lining used in coffins in the 70s, and it has traces of industrial paraffin, the kind used to seal objects that need to be preserved for long periods underground." "Coffin lining?" Thompson repeated, his voice barely above a whisper as he stared at the blue fabric under the laboratory light. The implication was clear and horrifying. Someone had buried something, or someone, in a coffin-like container. Sanderson carefully lifted the fabric with tweezers, examining the paraffin residue. "This changes everything. We're not just looking for missing persons anymore, we're looking for a burial site." The discovery cast a dark shadow over the investigation, transforming their search parameters dramatically. Instead of seeking living individuals, they now had to consider that Jessica and Matthew might have been deliberately interred somewhere in the vast wilderness surrounding Spring Creek. The following morning, the mood in town shifted once more with the announcement of a new highway planned to connect Spring Creek with the interstate, cutting through land adjacent to Baker's old property. The town hall meeting to discuss the project drew an unexpectedly large crowd, including Harold Baker, who arrived uncharacteristically disheveled. "This project will destroy critical wildlife habitats," Baker argued vehemently when called upon, his voice rising as he pointed to the environmental impact report. "The proposed route cuts through wetlands that support endangered species. It's environmental vandalism." Thompson observed Baker from the back of the room, noting how the former teacher's hands trembled when the chief engineer mentioned preliminary excavations would begin within 2 weeks. Baker's environmental concerns seemed genuine, but his agitation appeared disproportionate, his eyes darting nervously whenever the discussion turned to digging. After the meeting, Sanderson cornered the project engineer by the water cooler. "We'd appreciate priority access to any excavation sites," he said quietly. "There's a possibility they might reveal evidence related to our cold case." Meanwhile, Thompson spent hours in the dusty municipal archives, poring over property records until his discovery made him sit upright in shock. A significant portion of Baker's land had originally belonged to the Murphy family, sold under suspicious circumstances in 1967. That afternoon, Thompson interviewed Jessica's elderly uncle, Walter Murphy, in the nursing home. "My brother didn't want to sell that land," Walter revealed, his rheumy eyes clouding with old pain. "That land had been in our family since Spring Creek was founded, but after Margaret got sick so suddenly, he needed cash for treatments. Baker offered above market value, cash deal. Too good to refuse when your wife is dying." Across town, Baker stood at his property line, nervously watching surveyors place marking stakes for the highway project. In his hand, a small notebook filled with calculations and hastily drawn maps showed he was planning something, perhaps a way to protect whatever secrets lay buried in his land. That night, Thompson bolted awake from a nightmare, his sheets soaked with sweat. In his dream, he'd been digging through Spring Creek soil, only to find bodies buried everywhere. Under houses, beneath the school playground, lining Main Street like macabre foundations. The telephone rang immediately as he sat up, its shrill tone matching his racing heart. It was Sanderson, his voice tight with frustration. "Judge denied our expanded warrant again. Says we don't have enough concrete evidence to justify a full excavation of Baker's property, just suspicions and circumstantial connections." On the 1-year anniversary of the disappearance, a solemn ceremony was held in the town square. The Murphy and Collins families sat on opposite sides of the gathering, their shared grief now complicated by suspicion and different approaches to mourning. Eleanor clutched a framed photograph of Jessica, while George Collins stared stoically ahead, his jaw clenched against visible emotion. Later that week, Eleanor carefully arranged Jessica's childhood possessions in a memorial box. Her first pair of ballet slippers, ribbons from school competitions, and a diary filled with a young girl's dreams and observations. Each item placed with trembling hands and quiet tears. Baker's aggressive legal counteroffensive began when he hired Jeremy Collins, a prominent environmental lawyer from Denver, no relation to Matthews' family, to file injunctions against the highway excavations. His lawsuit claimed irreparable damage to sensitive ecosystems on his land, specifically targeting the area where preliminary surveys were scheduled to begin. The investigation gained another significant piece of information when Thompson interviewed Marcus Johnson, who had worked on Baker's property in the early 80s. "There was this area near the North Creek he never let us touch," Johnson recalled, called it his special reforestation project, had it fenced off, kept the only key himself, said it was experimental, too delicate for regular maintenance. When Sanderson was recalled to Denver for another case, he promised Thompson continued support. "This isn't over," he assured him. "The Bureau isn't abandoning the case. We'll find what Baker's hiding." Alone in his office that evening, Thompson meticulously updated his investigation board, drawing a red line connecting the proposed highway route to the restricted area on Baker's property that Johnson had mentioned. The pattern was becoming clearer. Baker's desperate attempts to prevent digging in specific areas of his land. On the morning when preliminary excavations finally began, despite Baker's legal objections, excavator operator Raymond Nichols called urgently over the radio. "Stop everything! I just hit something strange. Looks like a large wooden box buried about 6 feet down, sealed with some kind of black wax, and it wasn't on the geological survey." The excavator's engine fell silent as Raymond Nichols climbed down from the cab, his face ashen. Workers gathered around the exposed edge of the wooden box, an unnatural rectangular shape amid the disturbed earth. Thompson arrived within minutes, tires skidding on the muddy access road as he slammed his vehicle into park. "Nobody touches it!" he shouted, establishing a perimeter with yellow police tape while rain began to fall in heavy drops. This is now an active crime scene. With trembling fingers, Thompson dialed Sanderson's number in Denver. "Rob, get back here now," he said, voice tight with urgency. "We found something. Something big." Within the hour, forensic technicians in white coveralls carefully excavated around the mysterious box, photographing each stage of the process and collecting soil samples at various depths. The black paraffin seal had preserved the wood remarkably well despite years underground, creating a time capsule that had resisted decay. "Whoever buried this wanted its contents preserved," observed the lead technician, carefully scraping soil from the edge of the lid. "This isn't a hasty burial, it's methodical, planned." By late afternoon, the box had been completely exposed, revealing its approximately 6-foot length, a size that made everyone on site exchange grim glances. Using specialized tools, the technicians prepared to open it inside a hastily erected evidence tent, away from the rain and prying eyes of gathering onlookers. The tension was palpable as the lid was carefully lifted, revealing first the pristine white fabric of a wedding dress, perfectly preserved in the sealed environment. Thompson felt his heart constrict as he instantly recognized the gown from photographs of Jessica's wedding preparations. "That's Jessica's dress," he whispered, as Eleanor Murphy collapsed into the arms of a female officer upon being shown a photograph of the contents. The dress lay carefully arranged, as if waiting for its intended wearer, a macabre memorial created by someone who saw beauty in their disturbing obsession. Beneath the dress, technicians discovered a leather-bound journal, its pages remarkably preserved. The handwriting matched samples of Jessica's, confirming it was her diary. The final entries, dated just 2 weeks before the disappearance, contained disturbing details that sent chills through Thompson's spine. "Today I saw him again, standing in the rain across the street just watching me," read one passage. "I haven't told Matthew because he would be furious, might confront this man, and something tells me that would be dangerous." While evidence was being processed, officers arrived at Baker's home to question him, only to discover the house empty, with signs of hasty departure, drawers left open, clothes missing, and one of his vehicles gone from the garage. Thompson immediately issued an all-points bulletin for Baker and his vehicle to law enforcement agencies within a 500-kilometer radius. Back at the station, Sanderson and Thompson meticulously reviewed each diary entry, mapping locations where Jessica had reported feeling watched. The patterns revealed a calculated stalking campaign that had escalated in the weeks before the wedding. "I found another poem on my windshield today," Thompson read aloud from the diary. "The handwriting seems familiar, but I can't place it. It described my blue dress in detail, the one I wore only yesterday." Forensic teams expanded their excavation around the burial site, using ground-penetrating radar to search for additional boxes or disturbances in the soil pattern. The wedding dress underwent careful examination, revealing fibers caught in the delicate lace that didn't belong to the dress itself. Thompson showed photographs of the dress to Mabel Green, the seamstress who had created it. The elderly woman adjusted her glasses, studying the images carefully. "That's the dress I made for Jessica, no question. See the pearl beading along the neckline? I did that by hand. No two dresses would have that exact pattern." The discovery reignited national media interest, with reporters descending on Spring Creek once more. The Collins and Murphy families, united briefly by this new development, requested privacy as they processed the horrifying implications of finding the wedding dress preserved like a trophy. As evening fell, Thompson headed back to the station after supervising the careful transport of evidence from the excavation site. His police radio crackled to life with an urgent message. A gas station attendant in neighboring Pine Ridge had just reported serving an elderly man matching Baker's description, who had casually mentioned he was finally going to visit Jessica and Matthew after all these years, before driving off toward White River National Forest. Thompson slammed his vehicle into gear, tires screeching as he radioed dispatch. All available units to White River National Forest access points. Suspect Harold Baker heading there now. Within minutes, an emergency coordination meeting convened at dawn, with FBI agents, state police, and forest rangers huddled around topographical maps spread across vehicle hoods. "We have 4 main access roads and dozens of hiking trails," said Head Ranger Wilson, pointing to the sprawling green expanse. If he's familiar with the terrain, he could disappear for weeks in there. Sanderson organized search teams methodically. "We'll establish checkpoints at all vehicle entrances and deploy K-9 units at these trailheads. Helicopter surveillance will focus on these cleared areas where a vehicle might be visible." As the morning sun crested the mountains, helicopters lifted off from the school field, their rotors slicing through the crisp air. Thompson and Sanderson climbed into a rugged 4-wheel drive vehicle loaded with emergency supplies and communications equipment. "Baker knows these woods," Thompson said grimly, as they bounced along an increasingly rough forest road. "He's been hiking here for decades. If he doesn't want to be found." Back at the forensics lab, technicians made a crucial discovery. Under microscopic examination, fibers found embedded in the preserved wedding dress matched carpet samples from the Pinecrest Motel. The distinctive orange and brown synthetic blend was manufactured exclusively for a regional motel chain in the early 70s. "The dress was in contact with this carpet," confirmed the lab technician. "And not just briefly. These fibers are worked deep into the fabric, suggesting prolonged contact." Meanwhile, a police officer visited Patrick Donnelly at Mountain View Hospital, where the former maintenance worker lay thin and jaundiced from terminal liver cancer. Between labored breaths, Donnelly finally unburdened himself of the secret he'd carried for decades. "Baker paid me triple to replace the carpet and repaint room 8 at the Pinecrest," he wheezed, clutching the officer's hand. "Said it was a renovation for a friend, but there were stains. Dark stains that looked like blood, all over the carpet, splattered on the wall behind the bed. I never asked questions, but I've seen that room in my nightmares for 28 years. Deep in the forest, Thompson and Sanderson discovered signs of recent activity. A small campsite with still warm ashes and discarded food packaging. Thompson crouched, examining footprints in the soft earth. "These are fresh," he confirmed. "Size 11 shoes. The weight distribution suggests an elderly person. And look." He pointed to a distinctive pattern in the sole. "These match the hiking boots we photographed on Baker's porch last week." As afternoon shadows lengthened across the forest floor, Thompson pulled out an old, weathered map not included in the standard Forest Service materials. "There's an abandoned hunting cabin in this valley," he explained, pointing to an unmarked location. "It's not on modern maps because it was condemned in the 80s, but old-timers like Baker would know about it." While the search pressed on, hospital staff recorded Donnelly's official statement. "The blood pattern was strange," he recalled, his voice growing weaker. "Like someone had tried to fight back, handprints dragging down the wall. Baker watched me the whole time I worked, never left the room. Said he'd know if I ever told anyone." The forest grew darker as night approached, most search teams reluctantly radioing their intention to return to base until morning. Thompson refused, his voice crackling over the radio. "We continue. If we lose him now, we might never find him." Their reduced team pushed forward with flashlights cutting through the dense darkness, Thompson leading with single-minded determination. Suddenly, he stopped, dropping to one knee. "What is it?" Sanderson whispered, hand moving to his holster. Thompson carefully lifted a partially buried silk scarf from the forest floor. "This was Jessica's," he said, his voice tight. "Her mother described it in the initial report. a blue silk scarf with hand-embroidered butterflies. The team advanced with renewed purpose, moving silently through the undergrowth until Thompson spotted a faint light flickering between distant trees. They approached cautiously, surrounding the dilapidated hunting cabin from all sides. With practiced precision, Thompson and Sanderson positioned themselves on either side of the weathered door, weapons drawn. Before they could signal the breach, the door suddenly opened from within, revealing Harold Baker seated calmly in an old wooden chair, a photo album open on his lap, and a shotgun leaning against the wall beside him. "I was wondering how long it would take you to find me, Derek," Baker said with disturbing tranquility, slowly closing the album filled with dozens of photographs of Jessica taken over years without her knowledge. He then pointed toward a door at the back of the cabin. "They're waiting for you down there. After all these years, I think they finally deserve to be found." The silence that followed Baker's chilling words hung in the cabin like a physical presence. Thompson gestured to the agents, who swiftly moved in to handcuff the elderly man. Baker offered no resistance, his expression eerily serene, as officers secured his wrists behind his back. "You've kept them waiting long enough," Baker said softly, as he was led outside, glancing back at the rear door with an unsettling fondness. Thompson and Sanderson approached the door Baker had indicated, weapons drawn. The wooden floor creaked beneath their careful steps. When Thompson turned the rusted handle, a waft of stale, cold air rushed up from the darkness below. Their flashlight beams revealed a steep staircase, descending into what appeared to be a sealed basement. "FBI, anyone down there?" Sanderson called, knowing there would be no response. The agents descended cautiously, the wooden steps groaning under their weight. The basement had been modified, walls reinforced with concrete, a ventilation system that had long since failed. In the center of the cold space lay two forms, partially preserved by the dry environment. "We found them," Thompson whispered, removing his hat as he recognized the distinctive class ring still on Matthew's skeletal finger. Outside, Baker sat calmly in the back of a police cruiser as forensic teams arrived. His eyes followed Thompson when he emerged from the cabin, face ashen and gait unsteady. "I kept them together," Baker called out as Thompson passed. "Isn't that what they wanted?" At the county hospital, Baker was processed and placed in a secure medical ward due to his age and health condition. After consulting with his court-appointed attorney, he made a surprising request to provide a full confession on video, with the stipulation that the Murphy and Collins families could view it. The confession, recorded over 4 grueling hours, revealed the full horror of Baker's obsession. His voice remained steady as he described how his fixation on Jessica began during her sophomore year. "She was different from other girls. Special. She saw things in books that even I hadn't noticed. We were meant for each other, but she was too young to understand this." Baker detailed how, after poisoning his wife through gradually increasing doses of arsenic in her food, he intensified his focus on Jessica, following her for years, collecting her discarded items, and eventually convincing himself that Matthew was an obstacle that needed removal. "When they stopped on Highway 134 to fix the mirror, I saw my opportunity," Baker explained, his clinical detachment more disturbing than any emotional display would have been. "Matthew recognized me as Jessica's teacher and let his guard down. When he bent under the hood, I struck him with a tire iron. Jessica started screaming, but I was prepared with a syringe of sedative I used for my horses." The most horrifying details emerged as Baker described taking the unconscious couple to room 8 at the Pinecrest Motel, his prepared sanctuary where he had created a shrine to Jessica with photographs and newspaper clippings. "I wanted her to see everything I'd prepared, to understand our destiny together," Baker continued. "When she woke up and saw Matthew tied up and bleeding, she begged me to let them go, promised she wouldn't tell anyone." Baker's expression darkened as he recounted Matthew's partial escape from his restraints and the fatal struggle that followed. "Jessica wouldn't stop screaming," he said, tears finally appearing in his eyes. "She said she hated me, that I was a monster, that she would never love me. That's when I realized she would never understand." After murdering both Jessica and Matthew, Baker meticulously cleaned the motel room, transported their bodies to the remote cabin, and buried them in the sealed basement he had prepared days earlier. He then drove Matthew's car to the highway, carefully placing the wedding rings to suggest they had fled. The dress was too special to bury with her, he explained, his attachment to the macabre souvenir revealing the depth of his delusion. I preserved it carefully, along with her diary. I thought someday when all this was forgotten, I could take them out again and remember our almost wedding. Based on Baker's confession and the evidence collected, both families finally received confirmation of what happened to their children. George Collins, the only surviving parent at 84 years old, required medical support while viewing the confession. "I spent 29 years imagining 1,000 scenarios," Collins said afterward, his voice barely audible. "But the truth is worse than any nightmare. At least now we can give them a proper resting place." While a new generation of children played carefree in the schoolyard where Jessica once taught, between two now mature trees planted in the couple's memory, Thompson watched from a distance, feeling the weight of years finally lifting from his shoulders. "Some secrets find their way to the light," he murmured to himself, "no matter how deeply we try to bury them."